Hello viewer, the Nameless Scholar here. Once the inevitable force that would eventually break Cadia and go for Holy Terra, Chaos has been nothing short of a failure and a joke in Modern 40k. Here are the reasons why. Firstly, they completely changed how Chaos corruption itself works. In the old lore, Chaos corruption functioned similar to the One Ring from Lord of the Rings. You cannot control it, nor can you fight it off forever. By using your emotions, desires, and vulnerabilities, it will eventually beat you down and you will either die fighting it, or you will live long enough to see yourself serving it. The only way to circumvent this is by the following three conditions. 1. You don't have a free will. 2. You don't have a soul. 3. You are directly protected by another godlike entity, Grey Knights who use the Emperor's Gene Seed, or Harlequins under Chegorak. I do not care about hate is my shield and armor of contempt. As we have seen before, unless the previous three conditions above, chaos is all corrupting. Those words are to delay the inevitable. We saw this in Dawn of War 1 for crying out loud. Unless you're like a group like the Blood Angels, whose hatred of chaos runs so deep, the gods cannot tempt them with their goals. The Night Lords whose paranoia prevents most of them from trusting them, and the Iron Warriors who reject emotions, so the gods cannot tempt them with anything. You are next! You are next! You will fall to the allure of the dark gods. You can and you will be broken. And if they cannot corrupt you, they will kill you to make an example of you. Loyalist or traitor doesn't matter. The dark gods do not differentiate. There also wouldn't be a problem with this change if in 40k the Chaos Gods weren't Lovecraftian entities whose true natures were incomprehensible to mortals, that even knowing a fraction of their true nature or gazing upon them would either make one die outright or cost one sanity. But as I have established in this video, because Games Workshop is slowly turning Warhammer 40k into Age of Sigmar in space, now everybody can resist chaos corruption through quote-unquote faith, because that's how it is in Age of Sigmar. Because they contradict the old lore, the new lore is wrong. This is why Lionel Johnson being incorruptible is bad writing. This is why Rogel Dorn being incorruptible is bad writing. And yes, this means that Sisters of Battle can be corrupted by chaos. As also shown in Arcs of Omen, when Khorne briefly manifested in real space, swung his blade, and corrupted fleets of Primaris Marines and Battle Sisters. Aside from Khorne manifesting, I actually like this. And anybody who disagrees is an Imperium fanboy who doesn't understand chaos on a fundamental level. Because we need to give the generic human factions all the cool toys and abilities, because we need to sell more loyalist power armor. The second point is that Games Workshop has written themselves in such a corner where even with the fall of Cadia, a few major defeats would be all that it takes for the Imperium to collapse. Since Games Workshop is a for-profit first company that mainly focuses on selling their miniatures, in order to sell more loyalist Space Marines, they gave all the cool abilities and the equipment to them, and the authors over at Black Library had to write the lore accordingly. The best example is that the Primaris Space Marines have access to Volkite weapons, which are relics from the Horus Heresy, while Chaos Space Marines do not get access to them, neither on the tabletop or the lore, just like how now everyone can resist chaos through quote-unquote faith. And most importantly, because of the Great Rift and how the Imperium is divided in two, even with Rabute Gilliman and Lionel Johnson returning, a few major defeats and the Imperium is done for. I think it's why in the modern war things happen, but nothing becomes of anything. If it did, the Imperium would have to be actively losing All odds are stacked against them. They should be in the end times. They should be actively losing ground. But GW cannot afford another end times because it would hurt their sales. So instead, they have their offers artificially keep the Imperium alive. And my problem is that, from my observation, the Imperium fans see nothing wrong with anything I'm saying. If Chaos was written somewhat competent, and if the Imperium didn't have any Deus Ex Machinas, they would have been on the back foot by now. Chaos Space Marines would make up for the lack of numbers with summoning demons, while even more weight would be lifted off their shoulders because the Imperium would be actively decimated on all fronts by the Necrons and the Tyranids, while the Eldar do nothing because GW hates them, hint hint, and the Orcs would be too busy fighting the Tyranids on Octarius. Abaddon has been the joke of Chaos for years now. And when was the last time people cared about Be'lakor in 40k? No, seriously, when? To the point Huron Blackheart has more fans than both Abaddon and Be'lakor combined. To the point even Archaon the Everchosen, Abaddon's fantasy counterpart, is more competent and terrifying than the War Master of Chaos, both in fantasy and Age of Sigmar. Abaddon is so disliked and has been done so dirty by GW that even other named characters of Chaos are more interesting. Speaking of, let's look at the Traitor Legions and their Primarchs, and what GW did to them. The Emperor's Children. A faction that is uninteresting because most 40k offers and people do not understand Slaanesh on a fundamental level. Most people see Slaanesh and go, oh, god of sex. Lucius the Eternal is an uninteresting character compared to the other mortal champions of Chaos, and the only interesting thing done with them post-heresy was that one time they went Chaos Vaz witnesses, and through sheer charisma alone managed to convert an entire world into a Slaaneshi pleasure world. The main gimmick of the Emperor's Children is that they utilize the fear factor of Slaanesh first, with body horror and particularly their self-mutilation. But here's the thing, we already have a legion that scares their enemies into submission, the Night Lords. So it isn't just the Emperor's Children who are written wrong, but Slaanesh in 40k, who is fundamentally misunderstood by authors and readers alike. Slaanesh is more than just the god of sex. Slaanesh is hedonism pushed to its logical conclusion. The reason why Slaanesh and Khorne are fundamentally opposed is that Khorne wants you to live and die by the sword, while Slaanesh wants you to live as long as possible. Slaanesh doesn't want you to OD on drugs. What they did to Fulgrim, however, was much, much worse. Of course I'm talking about the Reflection Cracked. I hate this book. I hate it so much my voice is cracking. It assassinates Fulgrim's character, and as Suicide Squad killed the Justice League with how Batman was killed off, as well as Baldur's Gate 3 showed with Viconia Devere, if a piece of media shows something badly written as objectively correct, you have every right to ignore it. Fulgrim is not the type of character who would go, I'm too far gone, time to betray the Emperor. No, what Fulgrim would have done is to break the Lair Blade the instant he got off that portrait and seek the forgiveness of the Emperor. Do you see another reason why I think the Lion being incorruptible is bad writing? You are telling me, Fulgrim, somebody, if not for the corrupting influence of the Lair Blade, would have stayed instantly loyal to the Emperor, wasn't incorruptible, but an arrogant man-child like the Lion was. Get out of here! Speaking of an arrogant man-child, let's move on to the Iron Warriors. The main problem with the Iron Warriors is that Perturabo's characterization is very inconsistent. Perturabo has two personalities. One, the Greek tragedy. A man who only wanted to construct buildings and be an architect was forced into becoming traitor because he realized there wasn't any turning back from destroying Olympia, added with the fact that he's resentful of him and his legion's treatment by the others. A badass who beat Fake Grim into a bloody pulp, one-shotted Angron, and soloed the entirety of the Siege of Terra, managing all other traitor regions while Horus stayed at the back. Then he broke the Imperial Fists and Rogel Dorn on Sebastus IV during the Iron Cage, who was forced to become a Demon Prince only because Fake Grim had taken away his mortality when he reached his apotheosis. Perturabo was dying. And the second portrayal is the Petulant Man-Child. This is the more known portrayal of Perturabo, who was so petty that he murdered his foster brother on Olympia because he was better at sculpting than Perturabo was, who murdered his own sister, the only person he loved unconditionally because she started a rebellion, a man who was so petty that the main reason he betrayed the Imperium was because he didn't get any recognition for his work. Instead of integrating his pettiness as a character flaw, some authors make it his main character trait. Perturabo is an architect and a methodical strategist first, and a cold, petty man who would much rather trust automata he built over his son second. Aside from Dantioch, the Iron Warriors also don't have really interesting characters. Hanso is the Demon Kulaba guy, and that's it. The Night Lords. Aside from them being my favorite legion and Primarch aside, the Night Lords and Conrad Kurz are the best written traitor legion. Sevatar is a fan-favorite character. The Night Lords Omnibus is a universally praised series of books. Same with the Lord of the Night. There are characters like Zosahal and Talos who are genuinely interesting. The Night Lords' motivations are clear and set in stone. They are the legion that never gave up their ideals. The Night Lords have never been pro-chaos. They were always anti-Imperium. Conrad Kurz was distrustful of chaos, while Sevatar openly showed his disdain for it. Those who fall to chaos are shunned. The largest Night Lords warband is led by a Demon Prince, that is correct. However, most follow Krieg Asibis out of fear, not loyalty. This is great, and I wish the other traitor legions were written like this. The World Eaters. The lore of the World Eaters is nothing short of a mess. Angron is not an interesting character, so much so Karn is literally what Angron should have always been. Hell, even Lotara Seren is more interesting than Angron. The only interesting parts of Angron is that he's a tragic figure. With the new lore, we know that Angron was meant to be the empath Primarch, to the point he could have been more wholesome than Sanguinius, that he was essentially meant to be the actual head of the Primarchs. This should mean that occasionally Angron's empathetic side should shine through the Butcher's nails, but we don't get that at all. The only other interesting facet of Angron is that his whole tragedy is that he's doomed to be a slave for all eternity. He was a slave on Nuceria, he was a slave to an emperor he hated, and he was turned into the slave of Khorne by Lorgar. The Death Guard. The 14th Legion is in a very weird predicament. The established lore is good, it is the later additions to the lore that are questionable. On one hand, you have Typhus, who's a well-written character and fully loyal to Nurgle. On the other hand, you have Mortarion, who's a tragic figure in the sense he has become the very thing he swore to destroy. He's a psychic tyrant, just like his adoptive father was, and just like how he thought the Emperor was. He hates what he has become. He hates what his flagship has become, what his legion has become. But firstly, the problem stems from the fact that in the Horus Heresy, in the recent lore, he is portrayed as a petulant man-child, as if we didn't have Perturabo, when confronting Jagatai Khan, and Plague Wars, I guess, soft retconned it now that he's either with Urgler. I don't know, I hate Plague Wars, I hate Plague Wars, I hate Plague Wars! The Thousand Suns. Although not as well as written as the Night Lords, the Thousand Suns are the second best well-written Traitor Legion, while both Magnus and Ahriman are respective tragic figures. Ahriman, who is not only the best-written mortal champion of Chaos, he is still loyal to the Emperor but not to the Imperium, doing the things he does to find a cure for the Rubric, as well as Magnus, who never wanted to become a pawn of Tzeentch, but was forced into it, both of them knowing full well that they are unwilling pawns in Tzeentch's schemes, that they have been wronged by everybody, and they will never reach their true goals. So, because of the great tragedy and interesting side characters, I don't have anything negative to say about the Thousand Suns. The Black Legion. That's it. I don't have to say anything else. The Word Bearers. I will give old Warhammer 40k credit. It actually made me like the Word Bearers. It was when the Word Bearers were actually interesting with their role as Chaos Va's witnesses. The Word Bearers actually has characters beyond Erebus and Argel Tal, such as Eliphas the Inheritor, who's a well-written badass. In the recent lore, they also did Lorgar very dirty. He was peacefully enlightening a world about the primordial truth, Chaos, but the instant he heard that Horus lost the Siege of Terra, he decided at the last minute to just kill literally everyone. What the hell, GW? And finally, the Alpha Legion. The 20th Legion is the third best well-written Traitor Legion in the series. Even if the recent lore reveals that the one who died to Rokul Dorn was actually Omegon, and Alfarius is still alive, I'm still on the fence with that one. But for the most part, I am fine with the Alpha Legion. So, do you see the problem here? Just because Games Workshop is a profit-driven company, they are screwing over the Traitor Legions just so they can sell more Loyalist Space Marines. Perturabo has been screwed over in favor of Rokul Dorn. Mortarion has been depicted as another petulant man-child in favor of Jagatai Khan. Now, unlike the Lion, I have nothing against neither Dorn or Jagatai. What I do have a thing against is Black Library and GW running Chaos lore to the ground because they are slowly turning Warhammer 40k into Age of Sigmar in space. This isn't 40k anymore. I would have preferred 40k to burn in its own end times than live to see it becoming the abomination that it turned into today. And the worst part is, I'm not done. Chaos isn't the only faction I have a gripe with.